here. Hi there. My name is Lori Bierbrier. I'm a veterinarian with the ASPCA. I'm the medical director of our New York City Community Medicine program.
I am Jocelyn Kessler. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for our Community Medicine program in New York, Los Angeles, and soon to be Miami. And Dr. Bierbrier and I are here to talk today about beyond spay neuter. So we're going to outline a few different models, very different shapes and sizes of programs that are intended. Sorry, we have to stay in this box. We have been told this box. So we're here to really just outline a few different types of programs, different shapes and sizes, and ways that whether they are municipal animal care facilities, spay-neuter programs, or larger nonprofit programs like the ASPCA, have gone about expanding spay-neuter, expanding beyond spay-neuter, and offering better access to veterinary care in the communities that they're working in. So there's just some possibilities out there. A lot of this work has been happening for a long time, and I think you've probably been hearing about it quite a bit at this conference. And so hopefully today we're going to build on that. The idea is for this to be really sort of interactive. We have a bunch of slides, but we also want you to feel free to shoot up your hand to add to the conversation. When you do, I'll be repeating your questions. Because this is being recorded, anything that you ask, we'll repeat the question for the video so that when it's being watched, people will know what you asked. So just be mindful of that if you're going to ask your questions in chunks so that we can repeat it back. So with that, we're interested in knowing who is in the room. So there's a lot of possibilities, I know, at a conference like this. So first off, if we can find out who are spay-neuter programs or who are in a program that offers public spay-neuter currently. Okay. What about municipal shelters? Not that many.
We have contracts.
Yes. Contracts with municipalities, nonprofit. What about other types of animal care services, sheltering? Okay. Any animal control enforcement? No enforcement? A little bit, kind of enforcement? Okay. All right, cool. So there is a pretty wide range in the house today, which is great. Oh, and anybody who does, who incorporates volunteers into your program, or you are a volunteer at your program. Okay, awesome. Okay. So we're going to try to make this content relevant to just about anybody and any type of organization that you're working in, especially if you're currently providing some level of veterinary care services to the public. So just before we get into some of the specific examples of what is being done in the communities, we wanted to sort of paint a picture of the landscape of what is happening broadly. And then we're going to talk more specifically about what people are experiencing in really every community across the country, especially as it relates to veterinary care. So first off, income trends. When you hear the words income inequality, this is what they're generally talking about. So income inequality getting worse. When you hear that on the news or on the radio, what they're saying is that this is from National Public Radio's program, Planet Money. This is titled 40 Years of Income Inequality in America, this graph. And I know it's super hard to read, so I just want to point out what this is. So basically, when you adjust for inflation, income for the bottom 50% of earners, so that's this dark gray line at the bottom. So income for that bottom 50% of earners has remained flat. So that it starts at 1962 on this side, and it goes up to 2014 on this side. So in 1980 was 16,000, adjusted for inflation. In 2014, 16,200. So that's what the bottom 50% of income earners is experiencing. Now this red line is the top 1%. So you can see a major divergence of 1%. And they talk about some of the reasons for that, but some of it is subsidized homeownership or incentives for homeownership, tax breaks for homeownership, and that's where Some of this really took off in the 80s. Regardless of what the reason is and how we got here, it really impacts the work that we do today in nonprofits and working in animal welfare and helping people with their animals. So one thing to keep in mind about income in general is that people tend to move up and down the income ladder throughout their lives. So things happen that cause people's income sort of situation and status to fluctuate. So the reason I want to point that out, and the reason that's important for us as folks who serve our communities, is that you may see someone who doesn't appear to be in a state of need that you would identify as sort of a long, persistent, or sort of generational poverty, and what you might associate with generational poverty might not actually be what you're saying, because people do move up and down. So job loss, divorce, just moves and changes in circumstances, needing to drop out of the workforce to care for someone, a family member or a loved one's medical needs. There's a lot of reasons people can slip in and out of poverty, or what we might consider not just poverty, but what we might consider lower income. So that's important, because I know that we do hear a lot about our staff always sort of tries to assess need when clients come in, or not always, but they want to know that what they're doing really is making a difference. They want to know that ASPCA's resources are going to a really good cause. And so I think sometimes they can be a little bit judgmental about who's coming in, what kind of car they're driving, what kind of pet they have, where they got their pet, if they bought it, or if it followed them home, that type of thing. So you saw what's happening with income. This is what is happening with vet spending. So vet spending has increased as much or more, and by this graph, this is from The Economist, which is a financial, European, UK financial news publication. And what this is telling us is that spending on vet care has outpaced healthcare, housing, and entertainment in people's expenditures. Why is that? I mean, the slide says why it is, but in some part, but why is that? Why has vet care gone crazy like this, off the charts? What do you think? Yeah?
People's access to knowledge of what the standard should be for their pets?
Yeah. People's information about what's available, what is possible has changed, right? And people know it, and what is possible has become accessible to more communities across the country, not just the big major centers, not just where they're attached to vet schools. What else? Yes?
People valuing pets as pets and not as more outdoor animals, that transition.
Yeah, spending on pets in general has gone way up, and what people consider appropriate amount of spending for food, for bedding, for outerwear, all of that has definitely changed over the years. What else? Oh, she said what you were going to say. Yes?
Pets already considered as family now.
Yeah, their station in the household maybe has gone up some across the country. Definitely. There's other things too. There's the cost of vet school has been cited as one thing. Just a few months ago, I took my dog in for routine vaccinations, and she had an arrhythmia. And it was a Saturday. We were just getting bored of Tele before I left for vacation. And by that afternoon, she was at a cardiologist. And in my community, in one VCA in Los Angeles, not a fancy part of Los Angeles, Hawthorne, the VCA there has 3 cardiologists on staff. That blew me away. I couldn't believe it. And so I got to see one right that afternoon, and there were more available to me. And that veterinarian, had to go to extra school, right? She had to do a lot of extra education and expense for her school. She's practicing medicine and cardiology in an expensive market to live in. And so, for her to live and for the rent and it on and on and on. And so what is possible has really paced a lot along with human healthcare. Veterinary healthcare has been mirroring that, and that is really driving up the cost of care. One of the things when I was researching for this presentation, I came across this term, and I had never heard of it before, called the stop treatment point. And the stop treatment point, evidently, is a term that's tracked by the veterinary medical industry. And what this represents is the average dollar amount at which veterinary clients will stop treatment. And so, presumably, the alternative would be palliative care or humane euthanasia if they stop treatment. And the stop treatment point really tracks with the other things that we've been talking about here, which is back in 1997, it was $576. That was 20 whatever years ago. In 2012, it has continued to go up and up and up, and now it is, or as of 2012, it was $1,704. Now that's the most recent estimate that I could find, but certainly in 2019, it must be substantially above that 1704 number. And that, even back in 1997, that number was out of reach for most of our clients. $576, way out of reach for many ASPCA clients in New York and Los Angeles, and this is 2019. So that number could it could be close to quadrupling in that time frame, and it continues to rise sharply, and it is just leaving many, many, many clients and their pets out of the picture altogether. Question, yes. That,
Treatment for emergency, and that was the one treatment, or for the whole year?
I don't know. Are there any veterinarians in the house who want to take a crack at that? Do you think that's one time, Dr. McCobb, and she knows things. She knows things. So, thank you. So, Felly, my dog, who actually ended up passing away from her condition, from her heart condition. She's a Doberman Pinscher, so you can guess what was going on there. She, within a couple of days, we were at about $3,000, and we get a professional discount at VCA, so that was with a 15% discount. And then even to euthanize her, or ultimately the day that she did pass away, between the emergency care and cremation, it was just over $1,000. So the emergency was $631 or something like that when they tried to resuscitate her, and cremation $325. She's a big dog. So just to pass away is $1,000 in Los Angeles, and so you can imagine clients that we have who come to us because we're animal welfare organizations, and regardless of what our main mission actually is, they look at us as the animal people in the community, and they look at us with the absence of other options. They come to us over and over and over again for help because they're facing some of the same issues. And even if these treatments are not available in your town, and the actual average cost of vet care is much lower, chances are a lot of the incomes are much lower too in those areas. And so they all track together, and they all together create some really difficult situations. So I think that for us as a community of people who care about pets, and we care about the people who are attached to them, and we know that people, the pets are out there in homes, and that the person's relationship to that pet has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to afford these kinds of costs. We are being asked to respond to it, and so we can look at ourselves, and if we have the bandwidth, look at some thoughtful ways about how we might be able to start opening the door to helping more animals when and where it makes sense for us and our organization. So just how big is the problem? We talk about actual, the federal government definition of poverty, which is one number. But how big is the problem, I guess, for us as animal welfare people, assuming that, what percentage of households in your area have a dog, at least one dog? What do you think? Yell it out. 60, 50s. Even in New York City, where I used to live, it's very high. It's like 30, 40% of the households have at least one dog. It's much lower than nationally because of the apartment situation there, but it's very high pet ownership, right? And cats, something less than that, I guess. Households have at least one cat. There's a lot of pets out there in the world. And this article, this is a headline that was being thrown around. I forget what happened in the news, but this statistic came up. And this article itself is from May of 2018. And this was the Fed. This is a report on our Fed that said 40% of adults in the United States could not absorb a $400 surprise expense in their budget. So 40% of adults, if a $400 surprise expense came up, they wouldn't know how to handle it. They would not have the funds available to them immediately to handle it. So what is a surprise vet bill if not this, it's this exact thing. Vet care is this exact thing. You can go on for months and months, and all you need is dog food and some vaccines, and you're good. And all of a sudden, this pops up, and oftentimes our clients just need that little bridge, and then they can go, and then they're good. But it's that boost that they need to get over this hump of this immediate expense. And then that pet can live happily and healthily in the home for a long, long time. So I've talked about scarcity before, but before we talk about specific programs and how they operate, there's just something I think for us all to keep in mind about working with people in poverty. And this book, if you haven't read it, it really made an impression on me. It's called Scarcity, and I won't even try to pronounce the authors' names, but it's really just a fascinating book. It's two scientists, I think they're from MIT, and they did a huge study about the impact of scarcity on human psychology and the impact that it has when people are living in scarcity on their ability to make decisions, make decisions that are actually good for them. So good decisions for them and their families. And what they found was that people actually perform worse on cognitive tests, even when they introduce a hypothetical scarcity. So they were asking people, if your car broke down and it was going to be $2,500, let's say, to repair your car, what would you do? And of course, they didn't tell people what they were actually measuring. It was like one of those mall people with a clipboard. And they told them that they were measuring something totally different. And then they introduced this hypothetical scarcity problem to the person. And some people got the $2,500 or whatever, and some people got the small number. It was like a $200. And when they went out into the waiting room to wait until they were up with the next researcher, the people who had introduced scarcity, even though it wasn't real, made poor eating decisions in the waiting room. It was it's the craziest study. And so what they determined was that scarcity takes up bandwidth in people's minds, and people living in poverty are experiencing a really special, unique form of scarcity because there's scarcity of time. There's, people dieting experience a similar phenomenon they found. And people who are experiencing loneliness had a similar kind of phenomenon where it took up a lot of bandwidth and it made them less able to perform on cognitive tests. It made them less able to concentrate and solve problems. So what they determined was that poverty is special because it's inescapable. If you're dieting, you can just decide, I'm going to go ahead and have that, triple-decker sandwich. But if you are in poverty, there's no taking a break from it. And it is that constant sort of pervasive, inescapable form of scarcity that really wreaks havoc on people. And what they found is that it did not matter, that it was not actually the person, but this scarcity that they were experiencing that made the difference on the tests that they performed, the experiments that they performed. So it's really a fascinating book. So as I mentioned, scarcity takes up a lot of energy, and as a result, other things suffer. So poor people worldwide, they were international tests, have lower adherence to their medication schedules, to taking their own human medications. They perform less well on parenting assessments. Just like us, they're susceptible to impulse purchases or just plain lousy decisions. And the consequences of making those kinds of lousy decisions is much higher. And it tends to be self-defeating and sort of, the effect piles on. So if you think about payday loans, that's the kind of thing that preys upon people who are experiencing scarcity. And so in programming, I would encourage us, if you are currently offering programs to the public, there's a few considerations to think about to combat some of the impact of scarcity on your clients. So policies and procedures. People in scarcity, you can imagine, have a much more difficult time making an appointment. They might fully intend to make an appointment that they booked. They might tell you the night before, yes, I am coming. If you text them and they respond back that they're going to be there at 7 a.m. with their animal for spay, and they don't show up. Punitive policies around appointment compliance, prepaid appointments, so deposit appointments, to sort of guarantee compliance. Those kinds of things do tend to put up barriers. Transportation comes up as a barrier again and again and again. Los Angeles, we have a spay-neuter clinic. Our focus area was only a few miles away. We transported 50%, and that's in a city of cars. We had to transport 50% of the pets to our clinic just a couple miles away from the focus area we were working in order to get people there and overcome a transportation barrier. So thinking about that in your program and knowing that that's a major, major hurdle for a lot of people. And then pricing and transparency. People don't know exactly how much something's going to be. It's going to be really difficult for them to take advantage of your services. So as transparent as you can be about pricing and sticking to that and making sure that people, when they come, if you think about tiers, like weights, a dog between this weight is this price, and this weight is this price. Well, I don't know how much my dog weighs, so do I need to bring $100 or do I need to bring $125? If there's a cryptor kid, or a, what other thing might they charge extra for?
Pyometra.
A pyo, yes. So all of these things that your client has no idea if their pet has that or not because they've never seen the word cryptor kid. It sounds like a flower. Still sounds like a flower to me. And so they don't know. If they don't know, that's a barrier to them coming because nobody wants to be standing in front of you and come up short. After they've gone through all of that to get there for that appointment that morning with you, they don't want to come up short. So with that, sort of setting the table, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bierbrier, and she is going to take you through some examples of communities and organizations who have started to try to tackle this problem.
Great, thank you. So my first question before I begin is, for folks in the room, how many of the organizations you're working with currently provide some version of basic care beyond spay-neuter? Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir, which is excellent. So we're going to talk about a few different organizations to give you a little sampling of what is out there. This kind of work is being done by many different groups. It's being done by you. And there's a lot of different approaches to providing basic care. And I know we get the question sometimes where people say, well, what should I do? What's the cookbook? What's the recipe? And the reality is there isn't a recipe because it's so specific to the community. So the first group we're going to talk about is the San Antonio Animal Care Services. This is a municipal agency in Texas, and they were offering spay-neuter, some vaccine clinics, and didn't really have the means to add a lot. But what they did is looked at who are the animals that are coming into the shelter. How can we try to provide some services that might be able to keep people's pets with them rather than being relinquished to the shelter? Because as you can imagine, for every animal coming into the shelter, there's a cost associated with caring for that animal and finding a new home. And what they found when they looked at their data was that there were a lot of animals being relinquished for being heartworm positive and owners who could not afford that treatment. So they approached this rather than saying, I want to add every service I can think of to help the community, they added one thing. Well, kind of two, but both start with the word heartworm. They added heartworm testing, and they offered a very simplified version of heartworm treatment. It may not be the gold standard of treatment, but it's not nothing. So they were able to respond to the needs of their community and help themselves at the same time as well. So we go from that, a agency that said, what's the one thing I can do, to next looking at a group in Los Angeles called SNIP LA, or like I like to call it SNIPLA, because I didn't really, SNIPLA. And they are again, nonprofit. They offer high quality, high volume spay neuter. Over many years, they have adjusted their services. So probably way back when, they did add one thing, and then they added another, and then they added another. And their version of basic medical care, or even what they might like to call wellness, actually includes dentals, mass removals, like all sorts of medical treatments that another group might say, well, that's not really basic care, that's the full gamut. But they didn't do it all on day one. This is in 2019 where they're at, doing all these different treatments, but I will guarantee you on day one, they didn't walk up to their board or their director and say, I want to offer the world. And then we go to Kennebunkport in Maine. And this is, again, a nonprofit animal welfare group in quite an affluent community, but in an area where surrounding that affluent community is not an affluent community. And they were struggling with the idea of we have the community saying to us, we have animals that need care. And to some extent, they were helping with some of the local veterinarians to help with that care. But then sort of associated with this was sort of this need to relinquish the animals. We'll help you, but only if the animals are relinquished. Well, that doesn't really help. The idea is let's keep people and their pets together. Let's keep them out of the shelter to start with. And so what they did is they built their own hospital. And again, different environment than perhaps a municipal shelter in Texas, where their approach was, we're just going to do it. Whatever the animal needs, we're going to do on a case-by-case basis. So if they have the staff who can do the care, and it makes sense for the animal, and it makes sense for the owner, they're going to do it. So the one thing that's, I think, really important to notice looking at these three different groups is each group was reacting to the community's needs, but also looking at what they could do themselves. So don't offer the moon, and then 6 months later you've run out of budget money. So the next thing that I want to share with you is the program that I know the best, and that is in New York City. In New York City, the community medicine program, we run a spay neuter program, both for the rescue community and also for owned pets. And we've been doing that for many years. And I will tell you, in the 10 plus years that I worked on the spay neuter clinic, we had animals coming in with ear infections, with eye infections, with a tooth falling out. And officially we didn't treat any of those things. And don't tell my boss, but accidentally ear medicine would end up in a dog's ear, and I call them accidentals, that a tooth fell out, happened to be with a hemostat, that it happened to fall out, because you were there and you wanted to help the animal. So in some ways we were doing basic care all along, but it was kind of unofficial. But in looking at the research in New York City, just going back to what Jocelyn said about sort of the issue of people not having, so much of the population not having the means to pay for some basic care. There was a recent paper that came out from the University of Tennessee talking about the percentage of animals living in families where there is not great financial means. And using those numbers, we worked out that in New York City alone, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 400,000 animals living in homes where there are financial needs. Now, these are animals that are well loved, that are members of the family, but in a situation where those high costs that Jocelyn was talking about are barriers. Now, I'll tell you right away, we cannot treat 385,000 animals. I wish we could, but we can do something. So we decided to say, well, I was already accidentally putting Otamax and ear medicine in dogs' ears. Maybe there's a way that I can take our mobile clinic program and expand it so we're offering some services. And we already know that in areas of generational poverty, there is a need for veterinary clinics and veterinary care. So what we did is said, okay, we have 20 years worth of high quality, high volume data for New York City. We have, the ASPCA has people that look at data and research and map things for us. So we already knew we were going into communities to do spay neuter with our mobile clinics of areas of need, areas where there's no veterinary care, access to transportation was difficult. In general, there were a lot of barriers. So rather than reinvent the wheel, 3 years ago, we started the primary pet care program. And we already were really good at driving vehicles and doing medical work in vehicles. So we said, let's do that as well. And we looked at the areas of New York City where we were doing spay neuter. And these were the areas that our research team had told us were hotspots. So we have, there's my tomato. We'll look at that. This is the South Bronx. And then this area in blue is Central Brooklyn, East New York. And those areas, we knew there was layer upon layer of issues. There was a great amount of intake to our shelters. There was persistent generational poverty. There was a lack of veterinary clinics. And we already knew from our data of doing spay neuter that we had a lot of people already on needing public assistance and public health. So that is where we decided to bring our primary pet care clinics. This is what they look like. So I call it an exam room on wheels. And again, not trying to tackle the world. We say, what can we do in the span of an outpatient appointment to help people? And it was a great way for us to put boundaries on it. We said, we are not doing any sort of sedation. We're not holding animals in the clinic. We're not treating anyone overnight. What can we do in an exam room? And it turns out there's an awful lot that we can do. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Antonio and Coco. So Antonio, a gentleman who lives in Queens, New York, came into the municipal shelter, animal care centers, with his dog Coco, young, pitty mix, with her skin looking like this. And he came in to relinquish her. Not because he didn't love her, but because he could no longer afford to care for her veterinary bills. And he had actually taken her to a veterinarian already and gotten some care, but her skin was getting worse rather than better. And we're very fortunate that our animal care centers has a program where they will divert people, rather than relinquishing their animal, they will send them to us for care to see if there's something we can do. So Antonio came to our primary pet care clinic with Coco. And do you think it took an MRI and a CT scan and 1,000 blood tests and 12 days in the hospital to fix Coco? No, right? You're veterinary. I mean, you're basically got better. Like, I'm a veterinarian, got Dr. McCobb. What do you think? Probably not, right? You know what it took? It took a microscope. That's essentially what it took to help Coco. And I'm oversimplifying a little bit because there is, if I could do a scratch and sniff version of this, if you smelled Coco, she had like a funky, gross, nasty bacterial infection, but really what she had was a mite, a microscopic mite called Demodex. And one thing we really try to talk about in our primary pet care program is history and the physical. You know, the history knowing that she's a young dog. We learn in vet school young dogs get Demodex. So we scraped the skin, we looked under the microscope, and she needed this product, Brevecto. A few doses of Brevecto later, and she looked like this. So again, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but the reality is that there is so much we can do without having to turn things into a big, dramatic, build a new building, buy every medicine that is available. So our primary pet care services is not what's in Kennebunked. It's not what's in San Antonio. It's our own version of it. And there is no cookbook. So what we do is everything that you could, well, almost everything you could think about that you can do in an exam room appointment. So we take care of lots of vaccinations. Probably about 50% of what we do is vaccinations. We treat parasites, basic, simple respiratory infections, lots of skin and ears. Skin, ears, vaccines. That's kind of our day. A little bit of pain management, the animal that's come in limping, that we think there's something we can help. And we also do humane euthanasia. And for just the reason that Jocelyn was mentioning, that we want to make sure that it's not only really important for us, and I'm sure for you as well, that we're providing great care for animals to have an excellent quality of life, but we also want to provide for that animal and their family a respectful and compassionate way at the end. And so we've created a way where the people can come, they can stay with their animal for as long as they need to, and we have tried to really make that experience as supported as possible. And then we do triage animals who need additional care. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have a lot of time in this talk to talk about how and where we triage them, but I would be happy to discuss that with you as well. And I include spay neuter on here because although the talks that we're involved with here really have to do with beyond spay neuter, I want to remind everyone that spay neuter in our mind is part of basic veterinary care as well. And then the last item, which is in bold, is information. We really talk with owners. We want to make sure we listen to them, we get the history, we're answering their questions so that we can provide information, and even if we can't treat the condition that's wrong with the animal, we can help them know what it is. And that can help them make more informed decisions. So as I mentioned, communication is huge. This is something I talk with all our veterinarians about. It's not just about what products are on the shelf, which brand of antibiotics you have, and which service. As far as I'm concerned, providing information and communicating well is a huge service that we provide. And just as importantly, as we were developing our program, and as the other clinics were as well, we also looked at what we don't do. Because if we were to go into this thinking, I want to treat every animal, each animal that we try to figure out can we treat becomes this incredibly difficult emotional decision about what to do. So we needed to put boundaries on it from the start. And although this room is not filled with veterinarians, which is where I'm more used to being, I will imagine that on my next talk, when I am talking about basic vet care, there's going to be people coming to you and saying, can we do this? Can we add that? I want to do this. Or you going to your team and saying, I think we should add these things. And it's just as important to make decisions ahead of time about what you're not going to do. And we were able to do that in a really easy way by saying, we're going on mobile clinics out in the community. And that was our boundary that we set. And it helped us grow in a way that felt sustainable. It didn't feel out of control. It didn't feel like we were trying to take on the world. So I look at this as some of the communities that we're in, there was nothing available. And I'm not saying that now we've solved all the problems. We have not taken care of the 385,000 animals in need in New York City, but we have also done way more than zero. We've helped somewhere in the neighborhood of around 7,000 animals, and that includes Coco, who I told you about before. And the reality is it's not a straight line. I wish I could just say, okay, we've done none, and let's kind of work our way over here and we're done. But it's really messy. And as you can see from the examples we've given, each group has done their own thing because it's messy. What's happening in my community is not the same as what's happening in your community. And so it's really on purpose that there is no, this is how to do it. And with that, I would like to pass it back to Jocelyn, who can kind of bring this all back together.
All right, thank you. So, although the programs are super different, there's sort of like small increase of access to basic vet care to sort of medium, large, and then ASPCA has a big program in multiple cities. There are definitely common threads. I spent time at SNIP LA interviewing their director of their clinic in South Los Angeles. It's in an area of high need. Animal Welfare Society in Kennebunk they're really in they're in a very upscale community with a lot of upscale vet hospitals, but they're surrounded by Maine, like they're surrounded by some rural, regular communities with some, economic challenges that the rest of America faces. And so on the face, they seem like really different communities, South LA and Kennebunk. But the way that the groups got to where they are now was just surprisingly similar. They started small and pretty slowly. The SNIP LA was a high volume, high quality spay neuter clinic. They expanded to multiple locations. The need for spay neuter in Los Angeles is still extreme. There's, by the ASPCA's estimates, the Community Welfare Index that they have done in surveying all the providers in the area who provide accessible, affordable spay neuter, there's still probably $180,000 to $200,000 deficit of affordable spay neuter surgeries in the county of Los Angeles. That's a huge number that no one group, can possibly fill. And so it does beg the question, when do you expand? What's the right time to expand? Especially a lot of you are in spay neuter, in situations where you're doing high volume spay neuter, you're efficient at it, you're really good at it, your community still really needs it. And so branching out is a big decision, because if you could just do more spay neuter, because that is still really what is needed in your community, versus add soft tissue surgeries and orthopedic or all of these things that are available at some of the other examples that we looked at, the right thing might be just keep doing spay neuter and maybe some vaccines, because you need that herd health up. You still got parvo coming into the shelter. There's still a risk of rabies with wildlife and things like that. And so that basic spay neuter and vaccines might be the absolute best way for you to expand, is just to add more of that. And there may be some point in the future where you're meeting that demand and you're ready, to do a little bit more. And so the San Antonio model might be a lot more practical for most groups. Some of us are in communities where it's a way different picture. So I think that regardless of where you are, how much money or lack of resources are in your community, you really need to think about that first. Like, where can I provide the greatest additional resource? What's going to have the biggest impact of what I can do more of, if you're ready, in fact, to do more. And then add slowly, and really they've all been where they thought they could make the biggest impact, and it was because of community need. So it was because, in the case of Animal Welfare Society, people were having to relinquish animals to the AWS because they were standing at a veterinarian and there was no possible way for them to pay the bill. And the veterinarian wasn't going to treat the animal unless it was relinquished to AWS. So in that type of situation, they saw that as a place where they could make a real difference in their community. They all limited it to funding, available resources, and then they grew accordingly. So it's not necessarily all about money. You've got staffing challenges, building space. You even have a place for an exam room. Most of our facilities were not built to see, patients in this way. We don't have the sort of flow and the client waiting areas and the setup to do a lot of this stuff. And so it could be, impractical or really challenging without some substantial changes. But also funding. When I was speaking to AWS, they said it is hard to raise money for this. So they have a fund, and they basically dip into the fund to help subsidize. That's how they do it. They offer discounts for people with proof of public assistance and seniors for everything, for all their services across the board. But then beyond that, if the person does not have the ability to pay, they can choose to fund them partially or fully. And again, it's case by case. And they said to me, I talked to their head of development, and they said straight up, it is tough to get people to pay for other people's vet bills. It's hard. It's a hard sell. And so it does take a lot of work and determination. And in both the case of SNIP LA and AWS, has a bunch of full-paying clients, Kennebunkport residents that are full-paying clients and coming and using their hospital and paying, more standard prices for services. But they are getting lots and lots of veterinarians sending them their own clients that they're not able to help because the client doesn't have funding. And so it's always, I think, they're always walking that line. They're always sort of doing that dance of funding versus, money coming in from fees, money coming in from donations, and as much as the client is able to pay. In SNIP LA's case, they said that actually, most of their funding is from fees for services because they do charge something. And with their clients, they always do. Their philosophy is they don't assume that the client has no ability to pay. So they start out letting the client know what all their pet could use in terms of veterinary care, what their pet needs of vet care. And then they help prioritize and create a treatment plan that hopefully they can find something that works within the client's budget. So they prioritize the most important thing, and in a few months, if the client can get the money together, we'll deal with the teeth later. So that's how they approach it. And they also do have the ability to subsidize. And they told me that the Banfield Foundation grants for pet care grants, community medicine, grants from the Banfield Foundation is where one of their larger private donation sources of funding comes from. And I didn't even know about that. I went on Banfield Foundation's website and I thought, what is this? And sure enough, it's there, and they've given away quite a number of grants annually for that, and I think they have twice a year funding options for that. So most of the groups I think who are doing this work, other than the municipal shelters, which I think funded this in a different way, are scraping it together from a lot of different sources is basically how this is being paid for. And I know that's always a big question when we talk about these things, but it is hard. You can tell compelling stories and put together really great plans, and at the end of the day, it's a story that we as a field are going to need to get as good at telling as the spay-neuter funding story, because we feel like there have been a lot of funds available for spay-neuter, and being sort of armed with some of these statistics and some of this information hopefully can help us start to have those kinds of conversations with donors who understand sort of income inequality and social justice issues. This can make sense to different sort of non-traditional funding sources. It can make sense. So I guess in closing, sort of with all of that, I want to get a sense of, what, for those of you who have added services beyond spay-neuter, what kinds of things are you offering, and what kinds of things do you wish you could offer? Like, what's the one thing that you think would be the most impactful if you could add a thing? Yeah, sure.
So I'm sure you're well aware of this, but so in New York State we have no standards for animal shelters, right? So we can do spays and neuters in a dirt floor basement if we want, right? Nobody's going to come in and tell us we can't. So if we start moving into doing services for the public and more than spays and neuters, like now are we subject to standards that like a veterinary clinic would?
That's a good question, and I believe the answer is yes.
I don't know the answers on that.
Okay.
But we would have to, if you want to afterwards, we can touch base and look into it.
We're not doing surgeries in a dirt floor basement.
No.
No, I know.
Yeah, take that off the recording.
The question was about standards and if you're subject to regular vet practice standards if you expand in New York State, and we actually don't know.
Yeah, and
because we do have
to
hospitals.
Add to your point before about what if you don't have space and you don't have an exam room. Another thing we did prior to starting primary pet care, we did it for a little bit different reason, but it ended up getting us to the same places. We were doing vaccine events. So we were partnering with, right now we partner with the New York City Department of Health. Prior to that, we were doing other work. Now that was different in the sense that we would vaccinate 300 animals, but I don't think we said more than hello or goodbye to the animals. So that information communication piece wasn't there, but we did volume. And just this year, the Department of Health, they were doing rabies vaccine clinics anyways, but they only wanted to give rabies because of the human health concern. And they said, would you guys like to give distemper? And I said, okay, sure. So we started doing, so all of a sudden these animals that would have only gotten a rabies vaccine, now we're giving them, the FERCP and the DA2PP. And the event was already planned. We didn't have to plan the event, we just had to show up and provide the product. So that was like a really nice way to do something that was, I would say, a pretty low input on our part, but had a big impact, and it also created this great synergy with the New York City Department of Health for us. So that was, I think, a big win.
Yeah, agreed. Yes?
How do you balance, so for us, we're an enforcement agency as well, so how do you balance a veterinarian's obligation in Ontario anyway to report conditions of, say, neglect or cruelty with, so say like an animal's coming in with severe dental needs and you're doing anything that's in an exam room, how do you balance, obviously the animal needs that, but with the balance, or with the obligation to report, as well as being an enforcement agency?
Yeah, are you like, so your question was about how do you balance the enforcement side of it with the care side of it? And are you like Ontario, Canada?
Yeah.
Totally awesome because I'm Canadian from Ontario, so like I'm in. And I know the rules in Ontario are super strict as far as the requirement
reporting
for veterinarians to report, and I think it does put you in an awkward position. I don't think things are quite the same. I mean, we have tried to really build trust in the community so that when we walk in, we're not seen as, your dog has a skin infection, will I report you or will I treat you? We try not to have that approach, but I agree with you that it's very tricky if the history is there of being seen as a reporting agency. I think it'll take a long time to work on building up that trust piece of it.
But we certainly do still report. So we have a sort of ASPCA, we have a self-imposed sort of mandatory reporting for a number of things, other types of mandatory reporting for child services and things because we're in people's homes. And so when we are, when our veterinarians are faced, we know it's not up to them to determine if a law has been broken. What they need to do is assess the situation. If they think there might be cruelty involved, they have to report it. And in where we're practicing and all the places that we're practicing, that's enough. They pass along the information, and then we actually have another group. We have a legal group who will work with the local authorities and determine, do we need to report? Is this a reportable thing or not? So we have a lot more help with that type of thing. But the fact of the matter is that no matter what you're doing, you're going to have to follow the law. We have to report when we administer a rabies vaccine in Florida, and we work with people in poverty, and we know that Miami-Dade is going to go after them for licensing fees because they came to us and got a rabies vaccine. But we have to follow the law and try to prevent rabies, from spreading. And it's more important to us to make sure that a child doesn't contract rabies than it is to fight that battle. And so I think you just have to, our advice would always be to follow the local laws and be really upfront with clients, I think, also, so that they know what the deal is, because I think sometimes they don't, they're unaware of, they're unaware, and that is the reason that the pet looks like it has not been treated. Either because they don't have resources or unaware. And we have found in New York, we've worked a lot with the NYPD, and they're very willing to help when they know that it's a resource and it's not an overt sort of intentional cruelty, but it's a resource issue.
Yeah, and just one other comment. When we were developing the primary pet care program, I think we had this vision that it was going to be like crisis management, that we were going to have animals coming up in their arms to us. And the reality was, half the people are coming for vaccines, another 30% dogs have a skin infection or an ear infection, and it wasn't the drama that we were expecting going into the community.
Yeah, the animals are in much better condition than we ever expected. They're super well cared for in homes that are experiencing severe poverty, homes without a front door in Brooklyn. and they're experiencing this extreme level of poverty, and their dogs look really good, actually. So in terms of having to report cruelty, that has happened a very small handful of times in both, even with New York and Los Angeles combined. Yeah.
Are there any groups, agencies that have a mobile unit that can assist the community with reaching out? It's all up to just like, we're small, rural, municipal.
Yeah, I think
Make it work, but when there's no clinic, we drive an hour to spay neuter every pet before they're done. We may drive an hour 5 times a week because that's where our vet is.
Yeah, so the question is about the availability of mobile services because rural communities are experiencing just a really difficult situation with just plain lack of access to veterinarians, period, let alone whether it's affordable or not. And that's just a super difficult situation, I think. There certainly are some groups that do mobile programs, and they go out to rural areas and do a variety of whether they're in clinic, mobile, MASH style clinics. But I would say they're sort of few and far between. The coverage is not great at this point.
Yeah, and they probably, I imagine if they did, they're going to have their targeted areas because
Yes.
your money to do it comes from somewhere.
And traveling distance, paying a veterinarian to sit in a car is really difficult, I think, for most organizations, and that's what we're facing in rural communities where they're just on the road. Yes.
Have you seen any examples of, telemedicine being able to help in those kinds of communities where someone in a different part of the state could be available by phone or video?
Yeah, so the question was about telemedicine, and so far, no, we at the ASPCA have not. We have our post-op does a lot of things by, show me a picture of that funky looking suture site, and they'll make determinations of whether to send them in tonight or come, for a regular scheduled recheck or whatever. True telemedicine, I think is just now, there's some questions about the regulations around telemedicine. It would be amazing to have that, especially for situations like these guys, so that people know for sure that they need to go into a full service hospital, whether or not they need to go in, would be amazing. And I think it makes sense that it's coming, but so far it's been on a really, I think, on the down low limited basis.
Minnesota's piloting it native.
Cool. She just said that Minnesota is piloting veterinary medicine in Native American nation lands. That's awesome. We'll be staying tuned for that. Yeah?
Do you know if the highlighted programs and can verify their clients?
It depends on the program. The question was about income verification. And I think that I had on there, I think AWS definitely does. SNIP LA, I think it's really case by case. We have a lot of folks that are undocumented or just not connected to services, don't have IDs and things like that in the Southern California area. And so I think they're flexible, whether or not people are connected to resources. And then I think San Antonio has target zip codes is how they handle it. So they have free services, but it's for like their 25 zip codes that they've identified as focus areas.
And that's in New York City, where we've identified these areas of persistent poverty. We've sort of drawn boundaries and said, if you live in this area, you can use our services.
Yeah, so we don't income verify for our primary pet care because of where we're located. We do geographic verification, basically.
Okay. I think
All right.
we need to wrap.
I think we are out of time. Thank you guys very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon.